You're sitting in a co-working space on a Tuesday afternoon, and the woman 2 desks away has 400,000 followers and a course called Wealth Mindset Mastery that sells for $497. She is filming a video right now about abundance. She has $1,200 in her business checking account and a credit card she's been quietly rotating for 14 months. You know this because you can see her banking app notification flash on her screen when she sets her phone down to adjust the ring light. You didn't mean to see it. You looked away. But you already knew, in the way you always know now, the way you've learned to read the gap between what a person says and what a person has. Her name on the screen is Bree Sutton. The username has a small blue checkmark she paid an assistant to apply for. The lighting in her corner of the co-working space is better than anywhere else in the building because she brought her own. She talks into the camera about scarcity mindset, about how the people around her are trapped in old financial paradigms, about a morning routine that includes gratitude journaling and a green smoothie she didn't actually drink, just held for the shot. You are 3 desks away, with a laptop open to a spreadsheet that tracks the occupancy rates of 4 self-storage facilities, and the maintenance schedule for a small fleet of car washes you co-own with a partner in Tennessee. Nobody in this co-working space knows what's on your screen. Bree finishes her take. She exhales the specific exhale of someone who just performed something exhausting. She checks her phone. Her face does something small and tight for half a second before she catches it and smooths it back into the version of herself she sells. You have just under $3.4 million across business equity, real assets, and a portfolio that has been compounding quietly for 9 years. Bree has 400 zero-dollars people who believe she has more money than you. This didn't start with a course, or a camera, or a following. It started with a Sunday in your mid-20s, sitting in your parents' garage, going through your father's old toolbox, because your car needed a part you couldn't afford to pay someone else to install. Your father worked at an auto parts distributor for 31 years. He never made more than $58,000 in a single year of his life. He retired with a pension that covers about 60% of what he needs, and a habit of checking the thermostat twice a day to make sure nobody was running it too high. You loved him. You also watched him, your whole childhood, work harder than almost anyone you've ever known, and end up with almost nothing extra to show for it. That Sunday in the garage, something clicked into place that you didn't have language for yet. It wasn't that your father did something wrong. It was that nobody ever showed him the other game. The one where money isn't just traded for hours. The one where you build things that keep paying you after you stop showing up. You were 26. You had $9,000 saved and a job answering phones for a regional property management company that paid $41,000 a year. You didn't have a plan yet. You had a question. The question turned into a habit. Every property the company managed, you started paying attention to the ones the owners seemed to barely think about, the ones that just generated a check every month without drama. A duplex on Hartwell Street kept coming up in conversation because the tenant had been there 11 years and never caused a single issue. The owner, a woman named Patricia, who was 81 and lived 3 states away, mentioned during a call that she was tired of dealing with it and would probably just sell it to whoever made an offer first. You made an offer first. $84,000. You had $9,000. You used a small inheritance from your grandmother that you'd been keeping untouched in a savings account, plus a loan from a credit union that required you to sit through 2 uncomfortable meetings explaining your plan to a loan officer who clearly thought you were too young to be doing this. The duplex netted $640 a month after the mortgage. Nobody congratulated you. You didn't tell anyone outside your immediate family. Your co-workers at the property management company kept talking about vacations and new phones, and a co-worker named Diane, who got engaged and immediately started a wedding registry that made the office group chat feel like a performance everyone was required to attend. You sat with your $640 a month, the way you'd later learn to sit with every number that mattered, quietly, without an audience. That was 9 years ago. The decision that mattered most happened 18 months later, and almost nobody would recognize it as a decision at all. You'd saved enough from your job and the duplex income to consider a second property, a small commercial building near a community college that housed a print shop, a tax preparation office, and a vacant unit that had been empty for 4 months. Everyone you mentioned it to told you it was too risky. Commercial real estate, they said. Vacancy risk. You don't know anything about leasing commercial space. You didn't argue with any of them. You spent 6 weekends reading every lease agreement the broker would give you, You called 4 other landlords in the area and asked them blunt questions about what actually went wrong with their buildings. You learned more in those 6 weekends than in the 2 years you'd spent reading personal finance content online. The kind of content that talks endlessly about mindset and never once mentions a lease escalation clause. You bought the building for $310,000. You filled the vacant unit 4 months later with a dental hygienist starting her own practice. The building has been at full occupancy for 6 years. You never posted about it. You never made a video explaining the lease negotiation. There was no audience for any of it. And that absence of an audience is, you'd come to understand, exactly what let you make the decision correctly instead of performatively. Here is what the last 9 years have looked like from the outside. Nothing. You still drive a 2017 Subaru Outback with 121,000 miles on it. You still live in a 2-bedroom rental that costs less than what most people your age spend on a 1-bedroom. Because you found a landlord who hasn't raised rent in 5 years, and you've never given him a reason to. You wear the same 5 t-shirts in rotation. You've bought 1 new pair of shoes in the last 3 years. From the outside, you look like someone treading water. Comfortable, maybe. Definitely not someone with $3.4 million attached to their name. From the inside, the duplex became 2 duplexes. The commercial building became 2 commercial buildings. A friend from the credit union meetings introduced you to a car wash operator looking for a silent partner to fund an expansion into a second location, and 4 years later, that partnership generates $94,000 a year in distributions you barely have to think about. Somewhere around year 7, you crossed a threshold you didn't notice until your accountant pointed it out during a routine call. The portfolio had started generating more in passive income annually than your full-time salary. You kept working anyway. Not because you needed to, because the job was fine, and quitting felt like the kind of announcement you didn't want to make. Bree Sutton finds out you do something with real estate about 3 weeks after you start renting a desk near her at the co-working space. She asks during a kitchen area small talk moment, the kind designed to be brief. You tell her you own a few small commercial buildings and some residential units. You say it the way you'd describe the weather. You watch her run the calculation people always run. The Subaru in the parking lot. The plain backpack. The unremarkable lunch you packed from home in a container that's been through a dishwasher 1,100 times. She smiles the specific smile of someone deciding you're not worth the full version of her personality. That's nice, she says, already turning slightly toward her phone. I'm actually working on scaling into multifamily myself, manifesting a duplex this year. Honestly, you tell her that sounds great. She does not ask a single follow-up question. Not what buildings. Not what market. Not what the cap rate was on the print shop building, the number you spent 6 weekends learning to calculate correctly while she was building a personal brand around the idea that wealth is primarily a mindset you can think your way into. The conversation ends in under 90 seconds. You go back to your desk, you open the spreadsheet. You don't think about it again until that night, lying in bed, when you find yourself laughing quietly at the ceiling for reasons you don't fully explain to your partner. 3 months after that conversation, the co-working space starts talking. Not loudly. The way these things always surface, sideways. Through a mutual connection, who mentions something to someone, who mentions it to someone else. Bree's course launch underperformed. Badly. She'd projected $80,000 in sales over a 2-week window, and the final number landed somewhere around $11,000. Most of it from existing followers buying out of loyalty, rather than new customers buying out of belief. The ad spend that was supposed to fund the launch came from a business line of credit she'd been using more aggressively than her revenue could support. The credit card you noticed flash across her screen months earlier wasn't a temporary thing. It was a structural one. A gap between the life she was performing and the income actually arriving that had been widening for over a year. She still posts every day. The content doesn't change. If anything, it gets more aspirational the tighter the actual numbers get. A trip to a resort in Tulum that you later learn was financed by a brand partnership that paid in free lodging, not cash. A new desk setup with a ring light upgrade, purchased on the same business credit line that's already strained. You don't feel triumphant about any of this. You feel something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of watching someone perform a version of the exact gap you watched your father live inside for 31 years. Except inverted. Your father underperformed his effort. Bree was overperforming her reality. Both gaps cost something. Hers was just more visible. The actual stress test of your own life arrived the same month, completely unrelated to Bree, the way real tests always do, on a schedule that has nothing to do with the story you'd want it to follow. The print shop tenant in your commercial building called on a Wednesday to say they were closing. 22 years in business, done in, finally, by a printing technology shift that had been eroding their margins for half a decade. They gave you 60 days notice, which was generous of them, but 60 days notice on a 2,400 square foot commercial unit in a market with rising vacancy is still 60 days of a hole in your projected income. Most people in your position would panic. You opened the deployment account you'd been building specifically for moments like this. 11 months of operating reserves across the entire portfolio, sitting quietly, doing nothing dramatic, existing for exactly this Wednesday. You didn't need a single conversation with anyone about whether you could absorb a vacant unit for a few months. You already knew. The answer had been built years earlier. On ordinary Tuesdays, nobody photographed. You spent the 60 days doing the unglamorous work. Calling brokers, walking the space with 3 different prospective tenants, negotiating a build-out allowance with a physical therapy practice that eventually signed a 7-year lease at a higher rate than the print shop had been paying. The unit was vacant for 41 days. The hole in income barely registered against the reserve account. Nobody at the co-working space knew any of this happened. You showed up the same as always. Subaru, backpack, lunch container, Bree. During that same stretch, posted a video titled, How I Handle Financial Stress as a CEO. In it, she talked about breathing exercises and abundance affirmations. She did not mention the line of credit. She did not mention that she'd quietly moved back into her parents' guest room 2 months earlier to cut her living expenses while keeping the studio apartment listed as her primary address for the brand. You didn't watch the video maliciously. Someone in the co-working kitchen had it playing on their phone, and you happened to be making coffee. You felt the specific discomfort of watching someone narrate a struggle you actually understood the architecture of, using language designed to make struggle sound like growth, while genuinely struggling underneath it in a way the language wasn't built to solve. The number crossed $3.4 million on an ordinary Thursday during a quarterly call with your accountant that you almost rescheduled because the physical therapy practice's contractor needed you to approve a change order on the build-out. You took the call standing in the empty unit, surrounded by exposed drywall and a contractor waiting for your signature. Your accountant read the number off a spreadsheet in the same flat professional tone she's used for 9 years. You asked her to repeat it, not because you didn't believe it, but because you wanted to hear it land in the actual room you were standing in, surrounded by dust and an unfinished wall, instead of somewhere it might have felt staged. You signed the change order. You thanked your accountant. You hung up and helped the contractor move a stack of drywall sheets because an extra set of hands was faster than waiting for his crew to come back from lunch. Nothing about the next hour changed. You still had drywall dust on your sleeve when you left. Bree posted a story that same afternoon about stepping into her next level of abundance. You saw it later, scrolling absently, recognizing now with total clarity the specific shape of a person narrating a destination she hadn't actually arrived at, to an audience that had no way of checking. You thought about your father, checking the thermostat twice a day for 31 years, underpaid for effort that was completely real. You thought about Bree, overpaid in attention for a story that wasn't. And you thought about the duplex on Hartwell Street, the one nobody believed in, the one that started everything, sitting there right now generating $640 a month. It has generated every single month for 9 straight years without a single video made about it. Here's what $3.4 million feels like on an ordinary Thursday. It feels like drywall dust on your sleeve. It feels like helping a contractor carry sheetrock because waiting for his crew felt slower than just doing it yourself. It feels like absolutely nothing announced itself, the same way it never has. Not at $640 a month, and not at 7 figures, and not now. Bree will keep posting. The algorithm rewards the story, not the spreadsheet. There will always be more followers for the performance than for the architecture, because the architecture doesn't photograph well, and doesn't fit in 15 seconds, and doesn't make anyone feel anything fast enough to stop scrolling. You're not angry about that. You stopped being angry about that years ago. What you are, mostly, is aware. Aware of the gap between what gets attention and what actually compounds. Aware that your father worked 31 years inside a system nobody explained to him, and aware that Bree is building a brand inside a different system that nobody's explaining to her either, just a newer, louder version of the same blind spot. This week, notice who you're learning from. Notice whether the person teaching you about money has the actual architecture underneath what they're showing you, or just a very well-lit version of wanting it. Because the duplex on Hartwell Street never once went viral. It just paid you, every single month, for 9 years, quietly, while nobody was filming.